Hi, I'm Laura,
And I'm David.
and welcome to this edition of Happily
Happily
Ever
ever
After.
after.
Today, we're going to talk about venue. Where do you have your wedding? That is so important. As we approach our first anniversary, we're also trying to decide how and where we're going to celebrate this wonderful occasion. So, David, when you proposed to me, did you have any idea where we would get married?
Actually, I didn't have any idea about anything really. But once we started the process, after the engagement proceeded, selecting a venue, believe it or not, is a very difficult process.
Yes, I had seen some churches that I wanted because my church was one option. And then we were looking at it, but from a kid, well, not a kid, a young person, I always thought about getting married in a garden because those of you who know me know I love flowers. So we were trying to figure out, and I even thought of getting married in the backyard at the Brown House when we lived in Pennsylvania years ago, before I met David, we had a lovely backyard, and I had always wanted to get married in that backyard, but it didn't happen. So we had to figure out what we were going to do.
And so, as you can see, and with the prospective husband trying to please the wife, as you can see, the wife has a lot of different ideas in their heads. So, what we're saying to you is that sometimes an idea may pop up, but it may not work out to what you really want. And it's going to take some time to select a venue. So, Laura mentioned about a church. So, let's talk about that. So, we actually visited, was it two churches or one church?
We definitely visited some churches here where we live in Anne Arundel County that were more historic, and they just didn't fit. I really also wanted to think about getting married at a museum. And there is a museum downtown Annapolis, right down the street from the courthouse, that not only is a museum, but it's also a church. And it's one of the oldest African American churches in Maryland. And David had gone to a wedding in Philadelphia inside of a museum, and he thought it was beautiful. So that was an idea. I also thought about the Reginald Lewis Museum. But the thing about getting married in downtown anywhere is extremely expensive, and then it's very expensive for your guests to park, and then you just rent the venue. You still have to hire catering, which can be very expensive as well.
So, we mentioned churches the first, so I can now and I can remember we thought about a church on the base at Fort Meade. We thought about having it done at New Psalmist Baptist Church.
Mhm.
We went to an actual church in the city of Linthicum. We visited that church, that older style church. But what I'm trying to say is it takes some footwork. You have to actually go to the perspective sites to see if this choice is what you actually want to do. So it's time consuming.
And actually, there are some venues that don't allow weddings, like the base. They were like, oh, we don't do weddings. So we were really taken aback by that because it's a church. And as much as I love New Psalmist, it was very, very expensive to have a wedding at New Psalmist. It was because we are very budget conscious, so that was a bit surprising as well. And then it was kind of far from where we live as well, so we really had some trouble And then I love nature, and there's a beautiful gazebo in a community that's not far from here. That is, and we talked about state parks. You know, I have a friend who just got married at a state park, but there's a beautiful gazebo that's a part of a community not far from here. That is, I think we thought it was part of Anne Arundel County Parks, and we were trying to figure out how we can get married there, especially once the pandemic hit, because once that happened, we can only have very few people come, and that didn't work out.
So we went to this community park area where the gazebo was. We went there a few times, and we formulated in our minds that that site wouldn't work out because we would have to cater in everything. We would have to bring all of the flowers. We'd have to make sure we weren't disturbed by people uh, when we take our pictures. Even at Patasco State Park, we found that it was hilly, so it was a difficult terrain to walk on to get to the wedding site. So again, going to the sites is very wise to make sure you choose the right site. Now, Laura spoke about the backyard wedding and how uh, we could either get married in her backyard at her home, or we could get married in the backyard that in the home we're living in now, our home. And so we chose to do it in our backyard here.
And that really made sense because this is where he proposed to me. So we got married here, and it worked out because when the pandemic hit, we could only have 20 people, even in an outdoor wedding. And we wanted to make sure everyone was safe because when we got married, there was no vaccine. And in fact, people were still dying at a very rapid pace. And we'll have to do a special episode dedicated to those in my family who died of COVID the week of and the day of the wedding, because that was just difficult. But so it was a tough choice to make, especially after the venue we chose, there was a problem and it just wasn't safe to be there. So COVID really wreaked havoc on our venue because we had everything set. And then, after taking all this time, finding a place, and recently I found a neighbor told us about a state park, and I looked at it, and they have this whole area just for weddings here in Anne Arundel County, and we didn't know about it. So, it's okay. I loved having it in the at the house because that meant the food and everything was here. Because if you get married at a park, you got to figure out, one of the things we wanted convenience. We didn't want a wedding here or a wedding at one place and then have all of our guests drive to another place for a reception. We wanted everything in one place. We're a little bit older. Everybody who was at the wedding is more mature. So we didn't want all that. We wanted it all together, really simple. The wedding here and the reception adjacent in the same space. So that was another component that was very important to us. And we were very budget conscious as well. Because the food, everything, every little thing is expensive.
It adds up.
It does.
It adds up.
And we need to talk about the rehearsal dinner in another episode. But once we set the date and had the venue, we had planned the rehearsal dinner. We had everything planned. And I think what we did instead worked out well. It just wasn't what we had planned. But I think it turned out beautiful.
It did. It turned out very well. And we were able to place it on YouTube, a YouTube channel.
Which you're looking at now.
Yes, where many of our friends from Hawaii to California to Texas to Ohio were able to, and Alabama, they were able to view our wedding.
Well, the thing is, if the pandemic had not hit, we probably never would have even considered live streaming our wedding. That had not entered our minds. I was concerned about one of David's sisters who was not be able to be there because when we booked our original date, she and her husband had something else booked. See, I called my family and said, "Is this a good date?" He did not. So we booked a wedding the same weekend they had a family event. So I was thinking about it specifically for her, but once the pandemic hit and everything was shut down and we decided to move forward in a very different way, we have had I think the day that the wedding happened, we had over 200 people come in and watch our wedding. And there was no way we could have, maybe other people can, but there was no way we could have afforded to have over 200, 250 people see our wedding. So that was a bright side to
Yes.
our event. So now that we've talked about that, David, we don't want to hold our viewers too long, but how do we equate what we experienced with looking for our venue as a married couple now, as we move forward into our first, completing our first year of marriage? And what is, I always like to end with, how does God fit into all of this?
Well, the Bible says, I believe it is in Psalm 32, where God says that He will lead and guide us and direct us in the way that we shall go. And we depended on God, on the Lord, to guide our steps and help us to plan out our wedding venue and to all the details of that effort to lead and guide us. And that's, if God is in the center, that's what's important. God has to be in the center.
Right. And so even though we had a venue and it was something I had not anticipated, being on the water, and I was like, wow, I never even dreamed of that. So I was very excited. And when things fell through, I was a little brokenhearted, but I've learned that it's not just the wedding and the venue, it's the vows, it's the marriage. And things happen in a relationship that's not anticipated, so we weren't anticipating a pandemic, but we were able to make those adjustments and come through, and we continue to make adjustments because that's what marriage is all about, is communicating and loving each other and making those adjustments and handling those things that are unforeseen. So that's so important because there are some things, if we make stupid or bad decisions, that's a no-brainer. But you can do everything with good intentions and good decisions, and things can still happen that you don't anticipate. But you have to have the resilience, and you have to, as David said, believe that God is leading you and that something is better. That's, because we don't know what would have happened, but we know we had a wonderful wedding and we have a wonderful marriage. It's not
Yes.
perfect, but it's wonderful because who's at the center?
God.
God. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this edition of Happily Ever After. See you tomorrow.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everybody.